the media labeled him the monster of Maple Street. Prosecutors claimed the evidence was undeniable. Fingerprints on the backpack, scratches on his arms, and blood on his shoes. The community demanded punishment. The court agreed, and Christopher was sentenced to death. But from the moment he was arrested, he said only one thing: "I didn't do it." On October 4, 2023, during his final appeal hearing, Christopher again stood before the court, wearing an orange juvenile detention jumpsuit. His wrists were cuffed, his hair messy, his eyes emotionless, not scared, not angry, just empty. The judge asked if he had any final words before the sentence was carried out. Christopher nodded and said, "Yes, but I want to sing it." Nobody understood what he meant until he began. The song wasn't random. It wasn't emotional. Every lyric contained information the court believed only the killer could know. The real location of the weapon, a hidden route behind a fence line, a description of a tattoo the killer had, details the police never released publicly. Within 30 seconds, the courtroom mood shifted from annoyance to confusion to alarm. The lead detective stood interrupting the judge, his voice shaking. "Stop the proceeding. That boy is giving us evidence we never found." And at that moment, everything changed. Because the song didn't just tell a story. It exposed one. As the last note of Christopher's song echoed through the courtroom, the silence was unlike anything the judge or reporters had ever experienced. The detective who interrupted the hearing walked toward the bench, his face pale, eyes fixed on the boy like he was seeing him for the first time. Not as a killer, but as a clue everyone had missed. The judge leaned forward and asked Christopher, "How do you know those details?" Christopher didn't answer with words. He looked toward the public seating area. Specifically at one person. His mother. Her face tightened instantly, jaw locked, hands trembling. She avoided his eyes. The prosecutor noticed and asked Mistress Hale, "Is there something you need to tell this court?" She didn't respond. Instead, she stood up abruptly and whispered, "I need some air." But the courtroom doors were already locked. The detective signaled the bailiffs, "No one leaves." The tension snapped. Reporters raised their cameras. The judge ordered Christopher to explain himself fully. His voice was steady but cold. "Because I heard the killer sing it." Confusion spread for a second until he added, "The night it happened." The prosecutor frowned. "You said you weren't at the scene." Christopher shook his head. "I wasn't, but I heard the song through the baby monitor." The room erupted. The victim's family gasped. The detective whispered to the judge, "There was a baby monitor in the victim's house. Her younger sibling used it." The judge turned to Christopher. "Are you saying the murder was recorded?" Christopher nodded. "Not video, just audio, but the killer didn't know the monitor was still on." The detective immediately called for a recess and left the courtroom with officers to execute an emergency warrant for the device. Meanwhile, Christopher sat quietly, staring forward, not triumphant, not relieved, just exhausted. When court resumed an hour later, the detective returned holding a dusty plastic baby monitor and a flash drive. His voice was tight. "We recovered the recording," the judge commanded. "Play it." The speakers crackled, then a voice emerged. A familiar voice. A voice almost identical to what Christopher had sung. The courtroom froze as they heard the killer humming the same melody, then speaking the exact incriminating phrases from the song. And then the most shocking moment came. The killer's voice said the name of someone present in the courtroom clear, unmistakable, undeniable. When the audio finished, every eye turned toward the same person. Christopher didn't look shocked. He just whispered, "It's finally over." The moment the recording ended, the courtroom shifted from silent disbelief to controlled chaos. The judge slammed his gavel repeatedly, demanding order, but no one was calm anymore. Not the families, not the attorneys, not even the officers who thought the case was already solved. The person everyone was staring at was Christopher's stepfather, Daniel Hale. He had been sitting quietly the entire trial, barely reacting, never emotional, just watching. But now, as every eye locked onto him, something in his expression changed. His confidence cracked. The prosecutor, previously certain Christopher was the killer, now looked pale. She slowly stood and asked Daniel directly, "Do you recognize that voice?" Daniel didn't respond. His leg bounced uncontrollably. His breathing changed, rapid, shallow. The detective stepped closer and repeated the question. Firmer this time. Still, no answer. Christopher finally spoke, not angry, not crying. Just tired. You told me to take the blame. You said nobody would believe a kid over an adult. Gasps filled the room. The judge leaned forward sharply. Mr. Hale, you are being asked a direct question. Daniel finally looked up, eyes sharp, jaw tight. You don't know anything, he snapped, not denying, just offensive. The detective nodded to two officers. Place him under temporary hold. As the officers approached, Daniel stood abruptly and shouted, You think I did this? You think a child could understand why? His voice was shaking, but there was something else beneath it. Fear. The judge ordered him to sit, but Daniel didn't listen. Instead, he turned toward Christopher. The room froze. You should have kept quiet, he muttered. This was supposed to fix everything. The prosecutor immediately asked, Fix what? Daniel hesitated, just long enough to reveal everything. Then the truth surfaced, piece by piece. Financial debt, unpaid loans, inheritance tied to the victim's legal guardianship, and a life insurance policy nobody knew existed. As Daniel tried to defend himself, the detective interrupted with the coldest line of the day. We found fingerprints matching you on the murder weapon. The prints wiped down except for the parts only a killer would miss. The judge exhaled slowly, like someone who had just watched a case collapse and rebuild itself in real time. Reporters typed furiously. Families cried, and Christopher, who had been hours away from a death sentence, just stared at his hands, processing the fact that the world finally believed him. The hearing was no longer about punishment now. It was about undoing a wrongful conviction before time ran out. The courtroom reconvened later that same day, but the energy was completely different. Earlier, everyone believed they were witnessing the final chapter of a convicted killer's life. Now they were watching the unraveling of a lie, one that had nearly cost a 14-year-old boy his future. Christopher sat surrounded by lawyers, police officers, and child advocates. His wrists were no longer cuffed. His posture wasn't proud or angry. It was exhausted. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Daniel Hale, who now stood in shackles at the center of the courtroom. His hands trembled. Not from fear of prison, but because the one person he controlled for years was now free from his silence. The prosecutor spoke first, her voice steady but shaken. Your Honor, with the new evidence, including forensic analysis and the partial confession made in open court, the state moves to vacate all charges against Christopher Hale immediately. A murmur of emotion rippled through the courtroom. Some cried, some nodded, some simply stared. Daniel broke the tension with a bitter laugh. He was weak, he muttered. I gave him everything, and he throws me under the bus for what? The detective stepped forward, voice low and direct. For killing the only person who cared about him. His grandmother didn't need insurance money. You did. Daniel finally snapped, shouting, You don't understand. I was drowning. She was refusing to help. She knew she could fix everything and she wouldn't. The judge raised a hand. That is enough. Silence returned. Christopher didn't look at Daniel. He didn't need to. The judge leaned forward, speaking slowly and clearly. Daniel Hale. Based on the evidence presented, you are hereby charged with first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, manipulation of a minor, and perjury. You will remain in custody without bail until trial. Gasps echoed again. Not shock anymore, but relief. Then the judge turned his attention to Christopher. For the first time since the case began, the judge's voice softened. Christopher Hale. The court formally recognizes that you are innocent. You were a child placed in an impossible situation. You deserved protection, not prosecution. Christopher swallowed, hard eyes filling but never letting the tears fall. Today, the judge continued, you are free. The courtroom erupted, not loudly but emotionally. Quiet sobs, shaky applause, a sense of justice finding its place. As guards led Daniel out, he looked back one last time, not with dominance, but defeat. Christopher stood slowly. Reporters tried to approach, but were blocked by officers. Someone asked, What will you do now? Christopher paused, voice barely above a whisper. Live! And for the first time since the nightmare began, he meant it.